Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters, and welcome to my spoiler review for Monarch Legacy of Monsters episodes 1 and 2. Before I hop into this, I just want to say please bear with me here, guys. I have come down with a cold and I'm losing my voice currently. But we do have some pre recorded content. I just didn't get around to getting this one before I got hit with the sickness. So, sorry if I sound rough and gruff. I really tried to commit and do the full spoiler breakdown, 40 minutes, go through each plot point of the episode, but as I was editing, I sounded like complete trash. So, rested my voice. I'm here now, and we're going to get through this thing. So, yes, thanks to the good folks over at Apple TV Plus, we were able to check out the first 8 episodes of Monarch here, and we do have a spoiler free review up on the channel for that with both Luke and I. But I am taking on the task of going week by week with you folks, just talking about all the spoilery bits of each of these episodes as they premiere. I'm an avid Godzilla fan. I have been my entire life. And I do like the MonsterVerse films. I have a lot to say about them. I don't really have a platform yet on here to really talk about them as of right now, but this seems like it's going to be the best outlet for me to kind of start doing that. So we're going to go through week by week here, going over each episode, going through all the spoilery bits that I like and that I found interesting. I'm not going to go through the plot beat by beat. I just think that would take way too long, and I just don't really have the time to commit to sitting down and breaking down each and every episode. Plus, I know some full-time YouTubers are going to do that anyway, and they're going to do a much better job than I could. So let's kick things off with episode 1 entitled Aftermath. Yes, this is a pilot episode if I've ever seen one. We get a lot of setup here, but there is the added bonus that, of course, with a show called Legacy of Monsters, you gotta expect some monsters. You gotta expect some kaiju, and they definitely show up. In fact, we kick things off in the events of Kong Skull Island. Yes, our boy John Goodman is back as Bill Randa for this sequence. He isn't, I think, actually there. I think that they've done some kind of CG augmentation. He just looks a little bit off, but John Goodman's getting up there in age, and they do have him doing some pretty physical things, so I do not blame them for this, and it doesn't look terrible. But honestly, you won't notice it because we've got the mother spider, I believe is what it's called, from Kong Skull Island, chasing him out of the bamboo forest. And yeah, right before he does that, he's kind of vlogging in a sense. He's got his camera up and he's talking to it and he's leaving a message for somebody. We don't know who yet, but he's talking to him. And yeah, he's getting chased out of the bamboo forest. He is on his way to, essentially die because he gets to the edge of the island where there is a cliff and some water. And yeah, he tosses in a bag marked Monarch on it with some very important documents. Yes, this is our MacGuffin for the show. This is kind of what becomes very important as we go along. And yeah, he tosses it into the ocean, accepts his fate, but we actually get a recurring, or I guess a returning character from the Kong Skull Island anime, which is the mud crab, monster crab thing. I don't remember its name exactly, but yeah, that thing crawls out of the ground, and the mother spider and that get into a brawl, and it's awesome. Like the CG here is very solid, and I think that was my biggest worry going into Monarch Legacy of Monsters. It's like when you have these giant budget films like the MonsterVerse films, you expect them to sink a lot of money into those effects to make them look top notch. Well, television notoriously doesn't really have those kind of budgets. I know things have been changing over the years with shows like Game of Thrones and stuff, but really, this has been the biggest thing for me that is part of something that I love so much, that I've gotten to see the biggest jump in translation here. Because most of the television that I watch is, pretty low budget. It's not very effects heavy, but this, I mean, it's all effects. It is the MonsterVerse, and they do a good job. I think that these creatures look awesome. The battle's pretty cool. It's very short, but it is a nice setup. It gets the episode going. It gets everything running. Again, we get introduced to our MacGuffin. We see some familiar faces. And, a giant spider and a giant crab duking it out is a big plus in my book. So, jumping from the opening there, I want to discuss the world building that they've set up in these first two episodes. This, as a fan of the MonsterVerse, is something that I was real excited to see. I know this isn't going to be really a huge plus for a lot of the normal fans of this stuff. They're not going to care that much, but it's been kind of in the back of my mind for a while of like, why aren't we seeing more of like the contingency plans, the emergency plans, like all these things that you would think would come into play when you're dealing with these giant sized titans potentially coming ashore or coming out of the ground or wherever they're coming from. And just watching them kind of wreak havoc on our cities, you'd think that there would be more fortification, there would be signs everywhere. There'd be this, and Monarch really lays that all out for us. As our main character, Kate, is getting off of her plane to go settle her father's affairs due to the fact that he's presumably passed away, they have to be deloused. They have these men come in and spray chemicals on them because they don't want whatever diseases are floating around because of these creatures now. And it's really cool to see that. It's something that has kind of been a complaint for me through the MonsterVerse is just it seems like we go movie to movie and none of the events really truly show what it's like living day to day in this universe. As Kate is going through the city, she sees things like missiles and towers and signage and all this stuff basically saying, hey, if a kaiju attacks and they're all putting up like signs of Godzilla, this is what you got to do. This is how you got to get out of here to survive. And, again, these are little details that, fans of this stuff really appreciate because I think it really fills out the world and it makes it feel more realistic as much as it can be for a giant kaiju show. Now, why don't we talk about some of the key players here that we have in our show? We have Kate and Kentaro, who are kind of these estranged half siblings. As we get into the show here, Kate goes to one of her father's old apartments in Japan and finds out that he's been living a double life and he's got another kid and a wife. And this really shakes her up. And it's plays for some really good drama and some good tension amongst the show. And it's another compliment that I can give Monarch so far, comparing it to the MonsterVerse, is that we've gotten some more time with these characters than we do with the characters in the films. And, just in this episode alone, I'm already very much invested in kind of the personal drama that they have going on here. It is interesting to understand and try to figure out, the mystery of their father and what's going on with Monarch and how he's tied into it. But then adding this layer on top of it of just having, him living two different lives is just kind of bizarre. And it was something I did not expect walking into this show. Now, we said this before, but the show, it time jumps, right? So you are kind of seeing events in the current day of the show, which is 2015, a year after the events of San Francisco and the first Godzilla film. And then you're also seeing events that take place way back in the past, even predating Skull Island. So I think it's 1959 in this episode is where we see Lee Shaw, who is played by Wyatt Russell, and his father plays him in the current day, which again, 2015, so current for the show's timeline. And that dynamic works really well, but I'm going to save that for episode 2 because that's when Kurt Russell gets introduced. But for this, I really like the chemistry between Wyatt Russell's Lee Shaw, Kate, who is just like she's a doctor, scientist. She is one of the originators and creators of Monarch, we find out. Lee Shaw is also a part of that. He kind of helps integrate the military into that. And then, surprisingly, we get Bill Randa, who is played here by Anders from Workaholics. He does a great job. I mean, it's not a one-to-one for, I think, how a younger John Goodman would go, but he is very interesting. And I gotta say, I did not connect the dots right away. It wasn't until they name drop his last name in episode 2 that I'm like, holy shit, that's Bill Randa. Like, holy fuck. Like, that's great. But I like it. I like the dynamic between these three characters. I like this group more so than I like our modern day group to this point, I should say. We reach a point in episode 3 where I think that things start to get better, but I can't talk about that yet. But yeah, just the characters as a whole in this are so much better, so much stronger than I would say anything that we've gotten in the MonsterVerse. I mean, the closest thing for me would be the characters in Kong Skull Island, and I think that's just because there's a lot of personality there. You also have a lot of high caliber actors in those roles, and I think that they just bring a lot of energy to that film, and that film is just fun in general. But yeah, I mean, as far as the other films go, especially Kong versus Godzilla and Godzilla King of the Monsters, these characters so far, and we're only an episode in, are wiping the floor with them. They just feel human, they feel realistic, and they just feel like people that I am enjoying spending my time with. So yeah, let's get into my biggest gripe of the show. Just I'll do it right here, and then we'll end on some good stuff. But the biggest gripe that I have so far in these two episodes, especially in this one, is the time jumping. It's just so abrupt, and it doesn't really do a great job of holding your hand. I'm a huge proponent of films not holding your hand, letting you think of things, but in a show like this, I'm okay with you guiding me. I'm okay with you, throwing up a date every 5 seconds if you have to. But like, there are moments in this where you're jumping from past to present, past in a different time, past in a current time, past in a future time. It's like, it's just too much. It just really bogs down the runtime, I feel. It bogs down the show. And, I forgive people for maybe being a bit turned off by that. I will say that it does sort itself out. We do level the ship a little bit as we go along into the other episodes, but I think that it just is a bit of something you're going to have to kind of bite down on and just figure out and wait for the flow, and it will come. But these first two episodes, I do not blame you if it is annoying and it is something that is getting under your skin a bit and making you a bit concerned for the rest of the show. Putting that aside, we got to talk about the San Francisco flashback. This is probably the money shot of the entire episode. I mean, this was the thing that we saw in all of the marketing material. They loved using this, and I understand it's very early on in the show. They don't want to show all their cards, but it's really well done. I am not as hardcore into the MonsterVerse stuff. I know that there are some people who have pointed out little inconsistencies with just how they've kind of recreated some of this stuff, and how they've done things. That doesn't bother me as much. I just like that we're reincorporating things. I like that we're getting flashbacks and input into things that we've seen in the MonsterVerse, and we're fleshing it out a little bit more. Like, again, I love the opening on Skull Island. I think that's great. That's fun. And this is a lot of fun too. It is actually a very tragic scene because you see Kate, she's a school teacher. She's on the bus when Godzilla is ripping through the San Francisco Bridge. And, she tries to save her students and she gets a few of them off the bus, but that bus goes over the edge and she loses a ton. You can tell that this has really affected her. They reference this throughout this episode quite a bit, even in the sequence that I was saying that I liked about them having emergency shelters. There's a touching moment between, her half brother and, the other woman in the relationship, I guess, by her perspective, that she just met, where they have to comfort her a little bit because they realize that, just the idea that Godzilla could be, coming onto land, it absolutely terrifies her, as it should for anybody. But she is just not ready to deal with those circumstances. And they do a good job of implementing the fear. Godzilla looks fantastic in this flashback. It's all really solid. It's all really well done. And yeah, it is definitely the money shot of the episode. So Kate and Kintaro's father. Now this is another element that I've enjoyed as the show has gone along. They really take their time to progress this. But again, once we hit our stride, this really starts to get moving. That he's a very secretive man. We do see him very briefly in this episode post the events in 2014. He goes to see Kate, and he's trying to convince her to follow him and go on this journey, blah blah, but she doesn't want to. She kind of knows what's going on a little bit with him having a double life, and it's a pretty harsh scene, I would say, for that aspect. But I think that this story is interesting. You know, they kind of once the whole potential Godzilla uh, coming up on land emergency thing is done, they kind of have this moment where Kentaro and Kate, they start talking, and Kentaro's like, "Well, you don't actually know our father. You don't know my father. He's a good guy. I will show you." And he takes him to an office, and you see all of the work that he's been doing and everything. And you know, it's one of those things where he's, I guess, trying to represent that his father was a busy guy who was doing a lot of important work, but what Kate sees is the same shit that she's been dealing with her whole life, where her dad was just so obsessed with his work and she never knew what he did. It's, again, this drama, this dichotomy between these two characters is really well done, really well fleshed out so far. And this episode basically ends with them finding out that her dad, or their dad, has a vault in the wall. And when they open it up, it is the bag that Bill Randa threw at the beginning of the episode into the ocean. And it has a bunch of his files and tapes, of course, all on mid 80s technology, I think, no, late 60s technology, my bad. And yeah, it's all on these tapes, on these files, and they got to figure out what the hell they're going to do with it, because it's like, well, obviously this is pretty important. And there is a touching moment, a key detail here, where the pass combination to the vault is a combination of Kentaro, Kate, their birthdays, and his anniversaries with his wives. You know, it just shows that, you know, I guess his heart was in it with all of them in a sense. But yeah, I'm real interested to see what more you guys will think of their father as the series goes on. But yeah, they open this up. They find the Bill Randa stuff, and it's cool. Like, I mean, like it is interesting because they take it to an ex of Kentaro's, so an ex girlfriend, and she's kind of like this, I guess, hacker or whatever. She just has a lot of cool shit that can process the footage that they need, or whatever the documents are, and she gets it done, and they start going through, and you see a lot of references to the MonsterVerse, lots of documents, lots of archive files, you know, all really fun shit. And yeah, it trips up Monarch, and now they know that the Bill Randa files have surfaced, and yeah, they start mobilizing quite quickly. But that wraps up at least the current, or 2015 portion of the episode. So we got to jump back to Lee Shaw here before we finish up this episode. So while this is going on, Lee Shaw and the crew, again, they're back in Kazakhstan, 1959. They are tracking down a Titan. They are monitoring its radiation. They're going through trying to figure out where this thing is. And I really like, again, the dynamic between these characters. This is my preferred timeline here. I just find it very interesting. I will admit that it gets better as the episodes go on, like most of the show does, but the the acting here is strong. I want to say that the characters feel very natural. They feel like friends, and that's what they're going for. And I think that it works really well. We get left on a big cliffhanger here because literally and figuratively, because they blow some seismic charges. There's references to them kind of, again, looking into its Monarch, Hollow Earth theory, and they find out that there's a nest for whatever this kaiju is that they're tracking. And yeah, it's of course, you know, Key wants to go down and get some samples, and you know, Bill, being Bill, he's like, yeah, let's do it. We got to get those. And Lee is saying, you know, hey, this is dangerous. The structure's unsound. You know, all this stuff. Should have listened to him, because the eggs start to hatch, and these bug-like kaiju monsters start chasing Key up the rope, and they weigh it down so much that unfortunately Bill can't hold on, and you know, Lee can't get to her in time, and she falls into this open pit, and then that is the end of episode 1. So yeah, in summation here, episode 1, you know, like I said, it's a pilot episode. It really gets things going. It tells you, you know, what your MacGuffins are, who your characters are, and I think it does a serviceable job. I think that it's a lot of fun. There is some good monster action, and you really just kind of get to see them setting the stage for the potential that this show has. And yeah, again, I really like the direction that it's going so far, with them giving us, the little finer details that us kaiju fans enjoy when it comes to getting into more of the monsters, getting into more of the world itself. It's really building up the MonsterVerse a lot stronger than the films have, and that's only in one episode. So yeah, jumping into episode 2 here, it's called Departure. And this is we're still jumping between timelines, but it is getting a little bit more consistent. It's not as jumpy as it was before. We're not going 2014, 2015, 1959. We actually start out in 1952, which is pretty cool. We get to see Lee Shaw getting assigned to Dr. K and or Dr. Key, and just how they met, and we get to see their kind of friendship start to blossom. And he's taking her. He's escorting her through her mission, and this is where they first come across Bill Randa, and that is where I had the kind of oh holy shit moment. That's Bill Randa. That's John Goodman. It was great, and there's a lot more callbacks and references as we continue through this episode. And like I said, back in our 2015 timeline, they tripped up Monarch. Monarch now is on their tail. They know that they have some files that they want. And we kind of got introduced to this gentleman in the last episode, but he really doesn't do anything until this episode. But he's the character of Tim. And yeah, he basically infiltrates Kate, who is on her way to the airport, just trying to leave Japan. Nothing good has come of this trip. She is just over it all. And she wants to get home to her mother. And yeah, he he basically creeps on her a little bit, and she tries to get him to go away, and then he reveals that he is working with Monarch, and he ends up abducting her. They take her into a car. We have this really cool car scene where she's starting to have these PTSD flashbacks about the events in 2014, and they end up getting into a fight in the car, and it ends up causing a big old car wreck. And it's a good scene. It's a good action scene. It's definitely shot really well. It's intense, and it was definitely a surprise for me coming off of the first episode where, most of the action was centered around the kaiju. So it was nice to see a little bit of human on human, fighting in this one. But yeah, as that's going on, we understand that Monarch is trying to track down all three of our characters from the current timeline. So they pay a visit to May's apartment, where she was, of course, decoding and deciphering all of the documents. They go and visit Kentaro and his mother, and that's a pretty intense scene. His mother really shows up in that one and distracts them so he can get away. Just before that, I should mention that Kentaro kind of had a little bit of a breakdown in his dad's office, and he did pull a file which has the Monarch emblem on it, and he now knows there's a man that his father knew by the name of Lee Shaw who has some significance to them. And yeah, I think that these are all elements that I enjoy. I enjoy the espionage angle for Monarch here. I like that they are kind of coming off as more the bad guys this time. I mean, they're not always making the best decisions in the MonsterVerse movies, but they aren't necessarily evil, but they are kind of coming off as not the greatest. And we'll get into that a little bit more at the end here. But as we go back to what's going on with our group, again, Lee Shaw, Bill, and Key, they've all just met each other. And they go to explore, or at least Key and Bill do. Lee kind of, takes the car and drives off because he does not want to be a part of this. He feels like he's above all this. And he has now found out that they are looking for monsters, and he, of course, does not believe in that. But they end up coming across the USS Lawton, which is super cool. Big callback, of course, if you know Bill Randa's history. That was the ship that he was on, and it was attacked by some kind of a monster, and it was sunk, and he is the sole survivor. So the fact that we get to see him kind of go back to that ship, and he's trying to figure out why it's here, it does add those, again, elements of callbacks and reestablishing lore and really just giving us a bit of a deeper insight to the MonsterVerse. Now, I will say we only get one kaiju appearance throughout this episode, and that is this. I think they're deeming it, maybe, I don't think it's Batra, but it seems to be what people are going with. But they call it the dragon in this episode, so I'll go with that. But it's this winged kaiju. It's really cool looking, but It's hardly in the episode. It's very much in here for the last like 15 to 10 minutes. And it doesn't do a lot. It attacks our group very briefly. Lee ends up seeing these kind of chemtrail things in the sky that Key had been talking about earlier. And he then hears the sounds of it and realizes that, maybe he should go back and rescue these two. So he does, and they get out of the situation and they watch this thing rip apart the ship and begin to fly off. And now they're all on the same page. Essentially, that's what this episode is supposed to do. It is supposed to show the formation of this group. We saw how they interacted and how they were friends in the first episode, and now we see the formation of it and how it came together. And really, the exact moment that Monarch became a true reality for them. Also, I think they mentioned this in Kong Skull Island, but if they don't, it has been a little bit since I've seen it. But Bill Randa does coin the term muto, so that was pretty cool to hear as a Godzilla nerd. I liked hearing that. That was fun. But yeah, that essentially ends the episode. But before that, we get back to our team in 2015. The trio end up meeting up, and Kentaro is actually the one to show them the file mentioning Lee Shaw, and he is staying at some kind of a retirement community just a little bit farther north in Japan. So they, make their way up there. They get a couple taxis in a van, and they get up there, and they introduce themselves. And this is when Kurt Russell comes into play, and you get to see the dynamic. And again, I really love the dynamic between him and his son Wyatt. I think that that's dream casting. You couldn't do any better. I mean, obviously they're blood relatives, so it makes sense, but yeah, I'm just super satisfied with how this all panned out for them. But essentially, Kurt Russell knows their father. He knows him very well. Apparently, he's like a son to him in a sense. He's basically like their uncle. So we're kind of starting to connect the dots that Lee Shaw is a bit more integrated with our two main leads than we know at this moment in time. But he's definitely like an uncle to them in a sense. And yeah, he basically fills them in on the fact that the facility that he's staying at is essentially a Monarch prison in a sense. He's got an ankle monitor, and after talking with them and hearing the information about their father and everything, he comes to the conclusion that no, there's no way your father's dead. There's no way that he would have done anything like that or gone been that stupid. So he's like, we got to make a choice right here, right now. He cuts off his like ankle bracelet, and he says, look, you came here for me. Now we can either commit right now and you can help me help you, or all these guards are going to swarm us, and we're just going to have to deal with it and get in trouble and deal with Monarch's wrath. And it's classic Kurt Russell. I mean, he's definitely a badass in this too. And yeah, I really really enjoyed this moment. I thought that this was a lot of fun. I thought that this was a really great way to kind of bring forth this version of the character. And again, the performances are just spot on between him and his son. I think that they feel very consistent for kind of getting into these flashbacks where we see him in current day and in the past. So it all works for me. So where do I sit with episode 2? I think that this episode is just fine. I like, again, the expansion of our characters. I like that we get into a little bit more of them and just where they stand as far as just like their relationships towards each other are getting closer. We get to see the development of the Monarch trio's relationship and all that. I thought that was fun. That was cool. um the lack of kaiju is definitely disappointing, but thankfully it's not like you waited an entire week. You got to see both these episodes back to back, which is definitely a smart call, because for a show called Legacy of Monsters, you definitely want the monsters, and they should know that. And don't worry, it's not a consistent issue. But yeah, they definitely wanted to focus up and really focus on the characters these two episodes. And again, it's the start of the show. You got to do that. This episode definitely is a little bit lower on my list as far as all the episodes that I've seen so far. And I think that the first episode's a bit better. Again, I like the espionage angle here with Monarch. I like Kurt Russell's introduction. I think it's fun. The one kaiju we do see is cool, and I like the relationships that we're seeing with our characters. But yeah, really things start to pick up in episode 3. So stick me here for next week when I'm going to break that down and get to talk about this episode, because there is a moment of reincorporation here that I absolutely adore, and I'm excited to get into it with you guys. So yeah, that's going to wrap that up for me. Definitely let me know what you guys thought of the first 2 episodes of Monarch here. Are you on board with the show? Is it disappointing you in any way? Is it overseeding your expectations? It is a solid show, I can tell you that. So stick with it, in my opinion. And yeah, definitely stick with me here. We'll keep doing this week by week. We'll keep going through, talk about the elements I like, talk about the elements I dislike, and yeah, we'll see it through until the final episodes. And it's gonna be a lot of fun. I enjoy the stuff. I like MonsterVerse stuff. I know I don't sound super enthusiastic. I am just sick, and thank you for bearing with me through that. But yeah, guys, I'm gonna go rest my voice. I'm gonna go probably watch these last 2 episodes of Monarch, and yeah, that's everything I got for you here. So definitely comment down below your thoughts, and until next time, I am Dylan Newell, and remember, stay scared.